Welcome to Evangelicalish, where we discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly of the American evangelical church, deconstruction, faith, and God's love through it all. Remember, if you're listening to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, or any of your favorite podcast platforms, let us invite you to join the live interactive recording most Wednesday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific on the Evangelicalish YouTube channel. Now to this episode of Evangelical-ish. And hey, all, welcome to the show. We're glad you're with us on the podcast. I am Paul.
I am April.
And April's not at the top of her game. I don't know. Maybe I'm not supposed to tell people that, but
no, it's fine. They could probably hear it in my voice or see it on my sickly little face. I am a mouth breather tonight. My nose has stopped all airflow, so I might turn my video off a little here and there if I have to blow my nose, but it's fine. I am here. I am alive.
Well, thank you for toughing it out like Michael Jordan with us tonight. And thanks for all of you being with us. Our usuals are in the comment section already. And John and Stephanie and Douglas and all the folks that join us week in, week out. Zoe,
Stephanie.
Yeah.
Our people.
It's good to have our peeps with us. And we have a great show, great guests. Don't forget, if you can, go to our podcast on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Give us a like, a subscribe on YouTube, comment, do all the things that help the algo to say, yes, people like these guys. They really, really like them, and help us out by just sharing our stuff and keeping us out there on social media. And we would really, 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 really appreciate it. And also, we are working on an online calendar so you can know what guests we have coming up and the weeks we're taking off and all that stuff. So we'll have that coming up in the not so distant future. All right. Yes. Is that all our prelims?
Hey, a calendar is really exciting. So
yeah, it's fun.
We can jump for joy. I need a calendar in my own life. Yeah, I think that is all of our prelims. I'm a little disappointed, not to call anybody out, but everybody out at the same time, that no, I don't think anyone left a new review after I asked for it for my birthday last week. Rude.
Wow.
I do not feel loved. I've only cried about it a little. No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. But seriously, leave us a review. So moving on, we do have a really awesome guest tonight who is here. One, because we've been meaning to have them on since they were with us like a year and a half ago, I think summer of 2021. Yeah. Jenna of the Gianu system came on and talked to us.
And
hey, welcome, Jenna.
I was in the green room making like happy faces. I was like, I don't know if they could see me. And I came in. I was like, oh, they can all see me now.
Welcome. Yeah. So if y'all remember, if y'all were around like at the beginning, it was our very first season of Evangelicalish, year one. Jenna came on and talked to us about having D.I.D. and what that journey was like. And I think that was one of the more fascinating episodes we've had. Like, I still think about it a lot, and I feel like we barely touched the surface. So, and for those that don't know, D.I.D. stands for Dissociative Identity Disorder. That used to be called multiple personality, right? Was the old name, and then they changed it. So anyway, Jenna, real briefly, because there's another reason why we have you on tonight that we'll get to in a second, but give us a little like brief synopsis of what you do and why you do it.
And by the way, before you do that, Jenna, I'm just having a freak out moment to think, there was a time when I didn't know this person. Like, there was a time in my life I didn't know you. It seems really strange now to think about.
Oh, I probably should just say Jenna's like
a few years.
Jenna is also a real life friend too. Like, we used to live in the same town, so I didn't want to downplay that. And I've moved away from her. Sorry.
Yeah, I haven't gotten over it. So just so you know, it's fine. But yeah, so I have D.I.D. and to summarize for the people not familiar with dissociative identity disorder, we'll start with dissociation. Everyone dissociates. It's like the brain's low power mode where it just kind of checks out. Like when you're driving home and all of a sudden you're home and you're like, oh, how did I get here? That's dissociation, but that's normal dissociation. When a person experiences repeated trauma before a certain age, during childhood, the brain can use this little trick in a way to help the child escape from something that is physically unescapable. And so that's dissociation. The identity disorder part of it is when all of us, when we're children, our consciousness exists in ego states. So, if you've seen a young child, like they can be having a complete meltdown one minute and then they're totally fine the next. That's because they live in these ego states of like curiosity and hunger, and they don't have a full like streamlined sense of consciousness. So if the child has a need from trauma to dissociate, the brain can put up barriers between these ego states. So that way, need for play and companionship is unaware that need for, safety and shelter at home is not being taken care of. So play can go to school, learn some stuff, and when they come home, play is then cut off from the part that comes home and experiences home life. As the child grows, their brain grows. And these parts that are separated from each other also grow, unaware, but informed by the experiences that they have. And this is where D.I.D. comes from. This is why it used to be known as multiple personality disorder, because these separate ego states are very differently informed. Like if you were only the worst things that happened to you, you would be a very different person than you are. If you were only the best things that happened to you, you would be a very different person than you are. And if you were both of those, but blocked off from knowing the other, that's what we are. So that's a rundown. We do advocating online and educating because when we found out we had D.I.D, it was very hard to find information. We were really like afraid. We didn't know what life could look like. We didn't know if it ever got better. And when it started to get better, we thought it was really important to be able to tell our story so that other people know that. So,
especially with, I feel like there's a lot of disinformation around D.I.D or multiple personality, especially, growing up in the church, people would say, oh, this alternate personality that you have is demonic, or you just have demons and you need an exorcist or something like that.
And in every movie where, D.I.D people are all axe murderers and serial killers, and that's generally the portrayal.
Exactly.
Right. So, and then D.I.D is almost always or always starts because of trauma in childhood, correct?
Trauma, yes. And it can be any repeated, inescapable trauma. So people were like, well, does it just have to be this type of trauma? No. Like for some people, it's medical trauma. But the trauma has to be repeated. Like there has to be repeated trauma and it has to be inescapable.
Got it. So I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this. And if you all have questions in the comments, feel free to leave them because there's so much to dive in. But there's a very specific reason why we had Jenna come back on tonight, which we've been meaning to have you back on for forever. But tonight worked out well because Paul, my co-host,
I'm on this side.
I know you're on that side. It's mirrored. So if you watch the show, if you only listen, you may not have noticed anything. But if you watch the show, you may have noticed Paul's appearance over the last year and a half or so has maybe changed ever so slightly, especially if you follow them on social media. You might notice nail polish and really cool earrings and vibrant colors. And, I have had people reach out to me and be like, hey, what's going on with Paul? And so we thought that we could answer that. Paul, what is going on with you? I will turn it over.
And you were very kind and said, when you're ready to tell, we'll tell. And So I also have been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder, which I didn't know for some 55 plus years of my life. And about 2015, 2014, hit a wall emotionally and spiritually, and had what my therapist says does not exist, which is a midlife crisis, but some version of that. Started going to therapy and was working things through. And I don't always remember exactly what the series of orders of things that happened, which is part of this whole neurodivergent way we do things in our brain. But I was watching a documentary about Woody Allen and his wife, Mia Farrow, or his partner, Mia Farrow. And one of their adopted children says that Woody had molested her as a child repeatedly. And that young woman had become what she calls an adult advocate for survivors of childhood molestation. And she puts this graphic up on the screen, and I really wasn't even watching. I was kind of working, but all of a sudden I looked up and there was this graphic on the screen that says characteristics of an adult survivor of childhood molestation. And there were like 10 characteristics. And I'm like, I'm all those. Like, those all describe me. And so I began going online and looking at repressed memories, and other people saying, oh, repressed memories are bullshit, and all this stuff. And I had a therapy appointment the next day with my therapist, and I told him all of this. And I said, yeah, but I was never molested. Was I? And my therapist sort of looks off in the distance, and he's like, I almost never do this, but he said, you know what? I've known since the first day you walked into my office. It was, you just have all of the characteristics. And so obviously that created a big turn in therapy. And so then here comes this amazing person, Jenna of the Gianu system, and doing a show not only around D.I.D, but how the church has failed people in the area of mental health and emotional wellness. And I am absolutely a testament to that. And Jenna, you can jump in on the story here, because you noticed something of me as we were having the podcast together.
Yeah. So, I explained it later to Paul because we didn't say anything directly at that time, but I was like, how gay people have gaydar. Well, as a multiple, I kind of have like D.I.D dar, like the did dar, and it was going off. Like, as we were all talking, I would say things that usually singlets are like, oh wow, that's interesting, and Paul's over there like giving me the intense nods, and I was like, that's not the normal reaction I get.
And by singlets, you mean not multiples, like
not multiple, not plural. Yeah. Yes. And so
you,
well, there you go.
Although I'm starting to believe there's nobody who's absolutely a singlet, but yes, not D.I.D, or what I was originally diagnosed as was DDNOS, which is dissociative disorder not otherwise stated, which means you don't have all of the characteristics necessarily. So, but yes, I think all of us have some parts on a scale, like even something as simple as, there's a part of me that wants to go out tonight and another part of me that wants to stay in. So we all have these different emotional parts. But again, as Jenna stated, in D.I.D, those parts are absolutely walled off from each other, and sometimes don't even know the existence of one another or the purpose of one another. So anyway, I interrupted there, Jenna. Go.
Oh, you're fine. And so, later, Paul reached out and,
well, wait, can I tell one story in that, Jenna? Sorry to interrupt again, but
yeah.
So what happened is you sent me an email after the show and said, hey, you should read this book. And you sent me a link to a book that was about internal family systems and fragmented parts. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'll never read that. I'll put that in my stack of 30 other books that I'll never read. I had a therapy appointment again that week. And my therapist says, oh, I have a book I want you to read. And it wasn't the same book, but it was about the same topic. It was a book called No Bad Parts. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we just had this person with D.I.D on our show. And he's like, I'm not saying you have D.I.D, but just read about parts and let me know what you think. And so I read both books very quickly and emailed you, Jenna, and said, why did you send me this book? I'm intrigued to know. And so, yes, this is where you told me about your D.I.D daughter.
Mm-hmm. My D.I.D. Well, and so we say in the community that you shouldn't out someone to themselves, like that can be dangerous. And so, like, even when it goes off, you never tell the person. And so I was like, I'll just send him this book, because it starts, like, the book goes from PTSD on through D.I.D. So, I could definitely tell, like, the PTSD stuff would hit. And I was like, if the other stuff hits, then Paul will come back with a conversation, which is pretty much what happened.
That is pretty much what happened. And so in that journey, April, and you can jump in and ask questions whenever you want, or we don't want to limit you from the show. But so Jenna started to coach my system, and that's kind of what we call it when we have a number of these parts. And she suggested that I set up a conference room inside my inner core, and even have a little intercom where you could call out and say, hey, any parts that want to come talk, because part of what happens in D.I.D is you have, for me, we had this Paul part that was always the part facing the world. Paul was our, cis hetero all-American sports guy, pastor, the guy that could interact with the world. And as we realized, Paul had stuffed all these other parts in a drawer somewhere in here, and they needed to have a chance to come out. And they would pop out from time to time, whether it was our Johnny part that was the part that would punch walls, or I once stuck my fist through a window and in a fit of rage. And so I had this conference room, and these parts started showing up. And what was really interesting is they were different ages and different genders and different sexualities, and began to have this inner conversation where some things in my life started to make sense, and things where I had been told I was a horrible person. And as a child, kind of wishing, like, oh, I wish I could play with Barbies like girls do. And just different things like that then as I was meeting these parts, like, oh, there is a fluidity of gender and sexuality in here, which has driven some of my behavior through time in life. And so I'm having trouble figuring out what the label is for all of it. But just one thing I know is I'm not just basic cis hetero bio male normal, whatever normal means, person. And I'm kind of defining it as, the Bible talks about us being fearfully and wonderfully made. And I'm believing my system is fearfully and wonderfully weird. And once we have now kind of embraced weird and been like, oh, that would be kind of cool to have earrings. That would be kind of cool to get my nails done or get our nails done. We've just found these things to be so fulfilling and affirming of parts of different genders and sexuality, saying, thank you for affirming us and letting us do some of these things. And yes, I see Jonathan in the chat here in the live saying normal is boring. And I actually think normal is a societal bondage. I really don't think there is a normal human being. I think we're all unique. And I just wish everybody could learn this very messy journey that my system is on, to say, I'm very unique, and some say weird, and some say call me a freak online or something else in this weird time that we live in. But we're now saying weird is beautiful, and we love that. So that's been kind of the journey and where we are today, and now trying to figure out how does that work with family and with marriage and with jobs and interacting and online social media stuff, and really figuring out how we're going to make life work.
Yeah. Well, I am glad that you are finally out. It's been a long time coming. And Jenna obviously is here because they have been a huge part of Paul's journey. And I love both of y'all. So and all of y'all, I should say.
There's a lot of us to love.
So Paul, I do have a question. When you are presenting in a more feminine way, is that like specific altars that are wanting to dress that way, or is it kind of more of an all-encompassing, like we just want to include everybody in our overall presentation?
So it's such a good question, and it's something we've been trying to figure out. Does this part like this? Does that part like this? So we have one of our really prominent parts, and the first that we met is a young woman named Avery, and Avery's first thing she said to the rest of us in here was like, "Hey, I've taken a lot of shit for you, man." And Avery was the part of us that would take over the body when trauma, very traumatic sexual assault was happening. And she's just like, well, I'm a girl and it's okay for this stuff to happen. It's just sex. It's not that big a thing. But she definitely is one that's been like, I look in the mirror and we look like the dad, and we hate how we look. And so she definitely is one that presses on a regular basis for like, oh, let's get something that's a little more vibrant to wear. Let's not be so, and it's funny because my spouse is just like, well, you never cared about fashion. And I'm like, yeah, because male fashion is boring as shit. It's really stupid. But I don't think it's necessarily like, oh, we're wearing this because Avery wants to. I think it is a combo. And honestly, there's a part named Ray in here that the system is starting to identify, like, oh, Ray is really the kind of the core of who we were when we were born. We call it the before, the person that existed before the trauma happened. And Ray has always had a fascination with feminine stuff, and the dissociation for Ray was often like going into a world of, and a lot of people, a lot of males will have fantasies about being female or something, in a sexual context. But for Ray, those fantasies were like, oh, what if I could just wear these type of clothes and go on a date with somebody different than what we've known, and so and people will ask like, well, are you gay or are you trans, and it's like, no, none of the above, and yes, all of the above. And so, and I'm finding this in a lot of Gen Zers now too. It's like, why do we have to label it and decide it's this one thing, instead of just saying, hey, we're living out these different parts of us and letting them all be present. And as we do that, they start to work together, where in some instances, they've not been working together in the past, and that's caused us a lot of problems. And so I don't know if I answered that. That was a long way to go. But yeah, I don't think you can say this. For me, it hasn't been like this part likes this and this part likes this, as much as all of us have sort of sliding scale taste of different things, and are loving being able to express that in presentation.
Awesome. I'm feel free to ask questions in the chat if y'all have any questions on D.I.D.
Jenna, our friend Painted Rose is here. Love you.
If I could ask both of y'all just for some more, information on like what the day-to-day life.
And by the way, can I say, April, like for me, and Jenna can define this, there is like no bad question. To me, questions are curiosity, and curiosity is caring. So as long as I know somebody cares, they can ask anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does day-to-day look like? Like, do you is it mainly like Paul, Jenna, host, and then y'all decide who, like what altars come to the front? Or are there things that trigger certain altars to come to the front? Like, just how does one live with DID? Because there's a lot of misconceptions out there in the movies that it's uncontrollable, that it's that it's not something that you can just live a normal life with, when clearly you can. So Jenna, do you want to answer that first?
Absolutely. First, I'll say one of my favorite sayings has been like, if you know one person with DID, you know one person with DID. The presentation is going to be different because what that child needed to survive is going to be tailored to their circumstances because it's a survival mechanism. So for us, there was, so the host is the one who runs the day-to-day parts, like, welcome to my life, I'm the host. And for us, it was like Jenna would run the day-to-day stuff. And if there were triggers, another altar would come out. But triggers could be positive as well as negative. For instance, Lil would be like 80s music and Lil was out, or specific interests. And I will say Avery, there we go. Avery has amazing taste in shoes. So
we are crazy for shoes, for sure. Sorry, did you finish with that?
Yeah. And so like for y'all's system, like how y'all work and interact is going to be, it could be similar, but it could also be very different.
Yeah. So for a long time, I have a new therapist now for a lot of reasons, but I tell her, like, I wish we could just go to sleep as Paul one night and wake up as Ray or some other part. And she's always like, yeah, but then you would miss just really important parts of this journey and what you're learning. And so one of the interesting things is when we say Avery shows up and says, I've taken a lot of shit for you, like, who is she talking to? Like who is that center person? We could call the host, but what we figured out is Paul, this Paul part has been fronting for 50 years of some sort, because that's who we had to be to survive in this evangelical American world. And in some ways, Paul has always felt like the Ray and Avery in us is the reason we were traumatized, that it was their fault. If we hadn't had those attributes in us, our molester wouldn't have been attracted, which is what a lot of trauma survivors believe about themselves. We brought this on ourselves, right? And so now we figured, like, okay, Paul is not the core of who we are. Paul is a mask that we've had to wear for decades. And because saying this feeling inside of always like, hey, I don't fit in this world and there's something wrong with me, which has always been the feeling. And every day of my life, and I hope this doesn't trigger anybody, but every single day of my life, I wished that I would go to sleep and die and not wake up. The old horrible poem of, if I die before I wake, I pray the Lord my soul to take. And I just thought, I don't fit in this world. I can't take my own life because, for one, I'm probably too chicken to inflict pain. And of course, then I'll go to hell. So I can't do that. So I just wanted to die in my sleep so that I didn't have to deal with the world anymore. And there was nowhere to turn in the church. My parents were never asking, like, what's going on inside? It's always like, if I was depressed and couldn't get out of bed, which would happen on a fairly regular basis, they would say, well, just ask Jesus to help. Just ask Jesus to help you and he'll help you. And I'm like, Jesus isn't helping. So now it's like, okay, we have Paul and Ray and Avery are these three parts that are most prevalent in us, with these other parts that seem to kind of surround them. So what does a person that is maybe Ray at the core, but still a lot of Paul and Avery. What does that person look like? And how do we live like that? And we've had the parts front, but for us, it's, I call it like the view master thing. Like our parts just kind of, even as I'm sitting here, because Jenna's here, all the parts are like, ooh, we want to talk to JA. We want to talk to, we want to talk to Lil. So I haven't had a ton of times where I've gone days with another part fronting, but our job is to learn how to live as this combo mechanism of Ray, Paul, and Avery, and see what that person looks like.
And Jenna, do you call that, like, I feel like you have a t-shirt that's like Blindy spaghetti or something.
Blindy spaghetti.
When there's like
when
not
it's all
one true
together.
front. Yeah, when there's a mixture of
Mhm.
who's kind of fronting.
Yes.
Thank you, Paul. Douglas asked, which I think is an interesting question, is each identity or alter fully aware of each other, or are some parts hidden from the others?
Do you want to take that, Jenna?
Oh, sure. So it's a process. The D.I.D is a covert disorder. So normally there's an aspect of not knowing. And so for us, when we first heard another alter, we only knew of one. That's all we could handle. And she knew that's all we could handle. We were not introduced to the others right away. And then there were 5 and we thought, okay, that's all. But because of like traumatic barriers and traumatic information that, once again, not ready to be able to process, there were still more that we hadn't met. And it would, like, slowly, as we were able to deal, and I mean, just barely able to deal. Like, let's be honest, that I was like super great. Like I was just able to deal with it. More information would come. So definitely there can be hidden parts, hidden knowledge. And that's all part of keeping life going, because it would be too overwhelming. And definitely as a child, the information was unable to be processed. So the information was still there. And now, as you're getting the skills to process, they're like, oh, hey, by the way, why don't you meet so-and-so? They have some interesting things that they might want to talk to you about.
Oof.
It's so interesting to, like I can, and I've always had these thoughts of sitting in the side of the room, watching this happen to me, to my body, which was Avery. It's really weird to think about. And in a lot of ways I thought, well, this isn't even real. This isn't true. I'm crazy in my head and I'm making this up, because I have these memories of sitting on the other side of the room, watching this happen. And then as you get into therapy and you talk to wise people like Jenna, they start to say, no, that's what you do. Your core self exits the body, because what is happening to you is absolutely unfathomable to happen, to be able to handle as a young child. And so you exit your body and allow what happens to happen. And so one of the things my therapist tells me on a regular basis now, and I'm sorry, this isn't answering Douglas's question, but that's how my brain works. But she tells me all the time, like, you're not sick, right? You're not broken. Your system is brilliant. What happened to you? You ought to be dead in a ditch somewhere or doing drugs and coked out somewhere, but you're not. You survived and you made a good life because your system is amazing and brilliant, and they saved your life. And I just love thinking of it that way. That and my therapist even says, we call this a disorder because we need insurance to pay for the care. But you're not sick. You're not disordered. Your brain has done exactly what it's supposed to do. And even Jenna was pointing out something in the last show she was on, where I even said that term, fearfully and wonderfully made. Our emotional, spiritual health system is absolutely brilliant and amazing in how we can handle things that come at us in life.
Mm. I love that idea of looking at it. And we talked about this when Jenna was on before too, of that it's a way of survival. And it's something that saved y'all's lives. And like not just saved your lives, but got you where y'all were functioning in life. And wasn't until y'all were much older, because both of you were adults, when you were diagnosed and realized it. Paul, I wondering for you, when you were diagnosed with DID, was it something that surprised you, or were there things in your life that kind of made sense when you got the diagnosis, if that makes sense?
Yeah, the answer to that is yes, all of the above. And it's been that way all along in therapy, because every little part that gets peeled back of the onion, it's like, oh shit, that's why I do this. That's why I do this. And so just, my first therapist saying, I knew you were a trauma survivor. I knew you were a molestation survivor. It was clear to me from the start. That was, I mean, that's nothing but an oh shit moment. But then you sit for a second and you're like, oh, now things are starting to make sense. These recurring dreams I had as a child, when I hardly remember anything of my childhood, but I would remember these snippets of these little recurring dreams. And all of a sudden, oh, those aren't dreams. Those weren't dreams. Those are things that are representations of what really happened to you. And so, yeah, my life makes a lot more sense now. I just thought I was a horrible person, a terrible boy, a young man who always fanciful, couldn't get life in order. And I had some success, but there always felt like I didn't quite live up to expectations. And now it's all like, oh, this all makes sense now. So very much and it's why it hurts my heart so much, because I think there must be so many people out there, and from my perspective, biological males who have been told, hey, don't run like a girl, don't throw like a girl, and for God's sakes, don't cry like one, who haven't discovered why they have this demonic thing inside of them that they can't get rid of. And in fact, it's just a protector inside of them saying, I'm here to take care of you. And it may not be the healthiest way to take care of yourself, but it's all the tools you got. And so God's not going to condemn you for using the survival tactics you have at hand. And I just want everybody to be able to have those moments, fucking messy moments, that you're like, oh, wait, but my life makes sense now. And it's just very, very freeing in the middle of being hella messy and turning your life upside down.
Kate asked, what would you like to be referred to as far as your pronouns go?
I'm going they, them, because I'm a multiple at this point. And I was actually using plurals to refer to self, and it's so confusing to people. And so I kind of conferenced with the system, and I'm like, can we just say I? Is that okay? And everybody's like, yeah, that probably makes sense. So, but yeah, I love the concept of they, them. So that's me. And we're also negotiating, like, does there need to be a name change? Does there need to be something that really denotes to us that Paul is not the full definition of who we are? And so we'll keep you updated on that. Those are sweet questions, by the way. I love what people are asking and saying.
Someone asked earlier, if I can find it, Kendra asked, what are some things that some of your alters like doing? Jenna,
you go first.
Oh, okay. I will do a shameless plug here, because so we all have very, very different likes and dislikes. Very different. So for instance, Lil can draw and Jenna makes stick figures. That's it. Like, but for us, one of the things that we all have in common is writing. So we're an author. We have a dark and gritty vampire book, which
is so good.
It is good.
I've read it.
The sequel is coming out soon.
And
then we have
a sequel. And it's also
got
good.
Advanced copy. And like Cats and Dogs, which is like this light and fluffy. This is the book everyone who knew us in person expected us to write, because we have a really like light and fluffy personality that everybody knows. And then we wrote this and people were like, where did that come from? And I was like, trauma. It's gotta come out somewhere. But
I love how you say trauma, like light and fluffy. Trauma.
TM.
We've definitely found we enjoy fashion and looking online for like what looks cool to wear. That's a very big change for parts in here, and again, just a lot of exploring what life is, and a lot of spirituality. And Jonathan is saying Anthony can't use I to save his life, huh, Jenna?
That's one of your altars.
Even when he set out to use a singular pronoun, like he knows we're masking. If he's in the front, we just comes out. How are you doing? Oh, we're fine. Like, sir, you said you could mask. Like,
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Oh,
my phone didn't get that.
I thought we were hearing one of your altars.
I know. Wow, real life, right here.
You can hear them too. Oh my gosh.
That's one of the things that I've learned in all of this is, there's always sort of an axiom in our society of like, it's okay to hear voices in your head, but when you answer, that means you're crazy, which is a term I hate. But to me, it's such a robbery of who we are. And I've learned, some therapists say, cultures that are very spiritual cultures. And I know in America, we think we are, but actually American Christianity is like, oh, there was this one mystical act with a guy on a cross and nothing else is legit, but cultures where they expect to have spirits visit them and talk to them and process therapy much better because their mind is more open to hearing things. And, back to Douglas's question, like we continually had parts show up, and this part named Reg, who turned out to be Regina, showed up, and I found myself, I kept saying, but Reg seems different than like the other parts. There's something different. And then in a mushroom spiritual journey, we found out that Reg was not a part. Reg was a spirit, like a spirit guide, some may say, or maybe something ancestral from our family line, or some have even said maybe from another life, a part that is here to bring wisdom and guidance and stuff. And so those are just some of the fun things we're learning to expand ourselves spiritually and see what else there is to find out there. And particularly, like, we've come to believe there has been some real repression and pain in our family history for a long, long, long time. And that in some ways, I am being called as that person to end that in our family line. And so that's some of the work of what we're doing right now. And
your altars and parts, they come with their own names, right? Like, y'all aren't naming them like pets. They come, they have their names, they reveal themselves. Is that right?
Now sometimes they don't have a name. We had one. Well, when E first came out, she kept talking about the little girl. Well, that was Lil, and since Lil just knew herself as me, like, who are you? She was like, I don't know, just me. It's like, well, why don't you pick a name so I don't just call you the little girl? And so she picked her name, and I know Paul has a fun story about when you try and name them.
we have a part named Adeline. So Johnny is our angry punch a wall, have rage out part, and Adeline came along, and Adeline may be a fusion of Johnny and another part. We haven't totally figured that out, but Adeline is much more like, oh, I'm going to rage out. but I'm not going to harm us doing it. I'm going to harm you. I'm going to figure out how to get you, and so that was Adeline. And when we met her, I've always loved the name Zoe. I really wanted to have a daughter named Zoe someday, and we named our daughter Sydney, and didn't have a chance to have a Zoe. And so I asked Adeline, like, can I call you Zoe? I just love that name, and it's really special. It means life, and can I call you Zoe? And Adeline was like, fuck no, that is not my name. My name is Adeline. And so, yes, they come with their own names. We have a little named Elgin that I have no idea where that name came from. I have no tie to that name whatsoever. I have since learned that it's a town in Illinois, and I have some friend that has a grandpa named Elgin, but this part showed up with the name Elgin, and I have no idea. There's nothing in my knowledge of history that tells me where that name came from. So somehow they come packing their own names.
And I do just want to interrupt to clarify for those who might watch this without context. Like, they're not like talking about physically harming people. People with D.I.D, despite what you might see in the media, are much more likely to be victims than the normal population. So rather than being the perpetrators, we're more likely to be the victim of crime or abuse. So I just want to put that out there because.
Oh yeah, Adeline would never physically harm anybody, but she'd just find a way to, like, verbally take you down.
Use words with some wittiness. One of my favorite stories, Jenna, that you've told, which is also like a fascinating part, is that your different altars have different tolerance, like for alcohol or for pain.
Yes.
And
So.
Can you just quickly like tell the story of when you with Lil coming to the front, because I think it was like a cupcake brought her out, or
yes,
I don't know what it was, but it's a really funny story.
So one of the interesting things for us about the disorder are the studies that show that there are physical differences from altar to altar and how they respond. There's a very well-documented study where a woman was in an accident and rendered blind, and then later, through therapy, finds out she has D.I.D, and 3 of her altars are sighted, and she was like, I don't know, but they say they can see. Well, they did an MRI, and so the visual cortex did not light up when she was in the front in control, but when these other altars were in the front, it did. So literally, there was no visual input being processed when she or other altars were in the front. So there are very documentable differences. So for us, Anthony was out with the hubs, and he likes
fabulous gay man.
And
right?
like yes, and he loves to dress the body up and take it out. Like, that's big fun for him. And so he wanted to go to a bougie restaurant, and they were out having a great time. And Anthony had a drink and had ordered creme brulee. Well, Lil, a child altar, what she saw was pudding. Now, we have some dietary restrictions and we don't get pudding. And she was like, pudding, we can eat pudding. And positive trigger, was in the front instantly. Well, at this point, we didn't know there would be any issue. That one drink that Anthony had, okay, it was a little stout, but he was fine. It hit her so hard. She was tipsy. She was giggly. Like, we're in a restaurant. She could not. And now switching can be hard to do voluntarily. Like, a triggered switch just happens, but we had the hardest time getting her out of the front. I was like, oh no, Lil, come back. And she was like, I don't know how. She was having a grand time, like a little unsteady when she went to the bathroom. It took us 15 minutes to get this girl out of the front. And from then on, there was the rule, like, if there's been alcohol, no littles can come to the front.
That's so fascinating. There was another question go ahead.
There was another question, and I want to throw out a stat because people are like, oh wait, isn't that thing incredibly rare, DID? Like how odd, that y'all had me on, and then it turns out that Paul has it. DID is at about 1.5% prevalence, which is the same prevalence as OCD. And this isn't including DD-NOS, which is like DID without one of the criteria. So then it's even higher. So it's more prevalent in the population to be multiple than to have obsessive compulsive disorder. So I just want to throw that out there for y'all. It's a neurodivergence, and it's more common than you realize. It's just not commonly
much
talked about.
lower than only 2% of the population are natural redheads. So it's pretty close to that if you've seen a redhead in your life, which I am,
So you've seen one.
then you've probably seen look, there's 3 of us here, 2 have
Yes.
DID, 1 redhead. Look at us.
But, and it may be even more prevalent. I know when I got my diagnosis, my therapist just happened to be one of the experts in the field of DID in our region. And he said, I've had 37 clients. He said, you're my 37th client with DID. How many of those do you think are men? Because he was trying to help me financially because he wanted to see me more often. And I'm like, I can't afford it. And so he started trying to make it work. And I'm like, why are you doing this? This is really kind of you. And he's like, oh no, it's totally selfish. He says, 37th DID client. Do you know how many are men? I said, I guess a low number, maybe a third. He's like, you're it. You're the first male client I've ever had diagnosed with DID. And he said, that's because men don't get diagnosed. He said, almost all men diagnosed with DID are in prison and have a compelled, legally forced psychiatric exam, and they find it out. He's like, men just don't go inside and find these things out about themselves. And another stat is, and I may have these numbers a little bit wrong, so I haven't looked at it for a while, but in America, a biological female is 10 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression, and is, I think it's 2 to 4 times more likely to attempt self-harm. Men, biological males in America, are twice as likely to kill themselves. So what does that tell us? That tells us women are going to therapy, they're getting diagnosed, they're sharing what's going on. Sometimes they're even trying to self-harm as a plaintive cry for help. Men are stuffing, feeling horrible about themselves until they finally say, I'm going to harm myself and it's going to work. I'm going to make it stick. And it's tragic. It's tragic. So again, I'm telling my story because my appearance is changing and people are asking and all of that. But even more so, like, I want to tell everyone, but particularly biological males in American society, where toxic masculinity is even more prevalent today than it's been most of my life, that it's really important that you look inside, that you let somebody help you look inside, because we're dying inside without it. And a religion that tells us we're dirt and sinners and bad and take it to Jesus and read your Bible more and it'll all be good. That is all identity stealing stuff, and it's a killer. And we need to say, forget this. Let's figure out how to live life to the full, as I think was Jesus' mission statement, right?
Well, I think that's just such a testament to how the patriarchy and purity culture and all these really strict gender roles in society, but especially within the church, harm women. Like, I feel like women are the more obvious victims of that system, but men are also harmed. Like, the patriarchy helps no one. It teaches men to shove down their feelings. Real men don't cry. You have to be tough. Like, women can be submissive, and they can cry and they can have emotions, but men shouldn't have emotions. Men should just suck it up, pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And it's such a harmful way to live, no matter who you are. And I think we've kind of looked over some of how harmful that environment, it's easy to look at these men like being in power, being like, oh, well, they're subjugating us, but they're also subjugating themselves by kind of wearing this mask and putting on this facade and trying to be this tough guy, but there's a lot of stuff going on underneath that, you know, they have no one to talk to about it. And so many pastors too, like suffering in silence, not having anyone to talk to about their own quote unquote sin or struggles or whatever. It's a vicious cycle.
I think part of the reason my childhood was as difficult as it was is because my dad was an Assemblies of God pastor, and he was hurting. I look back now and know he was desperately, deeply hurting inside, and absolutely not allowed to express that, to be anything less than perfect. Certainly, I mean, he would even preach against going to a therapist or a psychologist or psychiatry. And so he was dying inside, and it just created a horrible environment in our home. And I'm my parts are trying, you know, starting to have some compassion for him. And you know, this Christian thing of like, oh, just forgive and move on is really harmful nonsense, because you get to be angry. I've had to learn to be angry because I was never allowed to be angry. That's why I was a rager, because just injustice would come flying out with Johnny. But now that I've been allowed to sit with that anger, even with really good friends saying, oh, just forgive and get over it, and my family telling me that, after sitting with that anger for a while, now parts are starting to be able to have compassion for him and say, oh, it was that fucking Assemblies of God, that evangelical religion that just made it impossible for my father to get the help, my mother to get the help they needed to be fully living human beings. And so it made the environment very, very painful and dark in our home.
Yeah, there's so much stigma in the Christian church surrounding mental health. Like, you're depressed, it's a demon. You feel like there's more than one of you inside, that's definitely a demon. And so you can't acknowledge that, you can't voice that. And it really does create a lot of toxicity. And around the idea of forgiveness, one of my favorite things to use as an analogy is a bear trap. So, like, I understand that my father is a bear trap, and I put my foot in there and it got absolutely mangled. And now, do I blame the bear trap for doing what it was made, like what its nature is? No, I don't. But I would be a fool to put my foot back in the bear trap. Like, I'm not going to do that. Do I hold it against the bear trap? No, but there's no way I'm going to have anything more to do with that. I need to take care of myself. I need to heal.
As I hear all of that too, Jen, it makes me think of, like, I was trained to do exorcisms in evangelical, you know, the evangelical model, to cast out demons. And now, having met Paul and some other parts that I can tell stories about, to realize those were our protectors, and those parts are more than willing to harm ourselves to protect us. Yeah. And so they get identified as demons doing bad things in here. But when I think about us casting out demons, we were going after these protectors of these people and trying to rip them out. Like, the only protection they had for their heart and their psychology and their emotional well-being, we're ripping those things out of them in the name of Jesus. And it horrifies me now that I was ever involved in any of that, because it is cruel beyond belief.
Well, you only know what you know. You know,
Right.
it doesn't change the harm that was caused, but when you know better, you do better. And there are some people that do end up knowing better and still do shitty things.
Yes.
So at least we're not that, you know, at least we saw, you know, something that made us change and correct course. Because I went to AG, Assemblies of God colleges. So I know I have laid my hands on some people to try to cast out demons. My own spouse being one of them, you know, so.
To cast out their non-binary parts, right?
Yeah, gender
Oh,
confusion believes when it's
Mhm.
stupid.
If
It's
it's
cringe.
not cookie cutter with a smile on its face, then it must not be Christian. Mm-mm.
Exactly. Do y'all have any final things you wanna say on this topic? And then do we wanna react to one of your
I
videos
would like
or
to tell one other thing of an experience I had recently, and again, on my second mushroom journey. It was 6 hours of pure self-hatred. It was awful.
Mm,
And when you hear that, you'll say it's awful. But our guides on these journeys are saying, hey, if a monster shows up, like embrace it and say, monster, what do you have to tell me? What do I need to learn from you? So I leaned into this self-hatred and have been on this journey to like, okay, why is there so much self-hatred in here? And we realize, a lot of trauma victims have self-hatred because
Mhm.
you can't blame your parent or the authority figure that is causing the trauma in your life, because they're above reproach when you're a child, and so you take it on yourself. This is happening
mm,
because of me. And even molesters will tell their victims, this is happening because of you. So that brings a big chunk of self-hatred. And then Paul is trying to protect us from people knowing Ray and Avery exist inside here. So Paul has to hate them to be able to be cruel to them. And so there's even so we discovered this part that looked like a cockroach, and literally its name was Cockroach. And Cockroach was a self-loathing part. Cockroach's job was to hate all of the rest of the system. And we figured out Paul had partnered with Cockroach so that he didn't have to have compassion and sympathy on the rest of us. Now we know if he had that compassion, then he would have to realize bad things happen to us, and I've got to deal with that. And so through a whole lot of process, we realized what we needed to do with Paul and Cockroach was to again say, we know you were doing what you were doing to save us. And to some degree, we can argue that you did exactly what had to happen to save us. But it's harmful. And I read the story of the Gadarene demoniac in the Bible about where the guy had the legion of demons, and the demons say, are you going to send us to the abyss? And Jesus sends them into the pigs instead. And in some ways, that's Jesus having mercy on those spirits in that story. And we just thought, okay, Cockroach has a purpose in life. And he came to help, and he's not helping now. So let's release Cockroach to go find his purpose. And so we went down to the river, the San Joaquin River here, and waded in. It's super, super cold, and got a rock and brought it home and lit some incense. And we wrote Cockroach's name on the rock, and all the parts began to come out and write, thank you, or, be well. And we're not going to send you to the abyss. We send you off with gratitude and all of these things. And it was really emotional and moving. And then we went back down to the river and waded in and threw the rock into the river. And that self-hatred has gone to some degree. Now there's residue left, and we're having to say, oh, wait a second, we don't get to have that thought anymore, because that's not how the system is working anymore. But it's that spirituality of gratitude for even the harmful things, and then saying, but we're going to move off of that now, that has really released us into something. And this just happened 2 weeks ago, so I'm still learning. I feel so vulnerable now because that protective blanket is gone, but it feels like there's new skin, and it's going to take a while for this new skin to develop some toughness, but it's absolutely life-changing. And it makes me so angry in some ways to think I lived 50 some odd years this way with nobody ever telling me that there was a full life to be had. I just wanted to die and get into the next world where it's all perfect in the sweet by and by. And now I'm convinced, no, our job is to bring heaven to earth now. Like, we are to work on these things now, even at 58. This is my job now. And so I am gonna start living life, man, and instead of being shut down and just hoping that the rapture will happen and get me the hell out of here. Because I think if we don't fix it here, we take it with us and we have to work on it in the next life. And so I think I'm going to work on it here.
Well, you only live once, and like, we are here now. So why live for the next life? Because we don't have any tangible proof of what that life is even going to look like, but we do have tangible proof that we are alive right now, and we might as well make the best of what we've been given.
Yeah, I'm not totally sure. I believe we only live once now, but that's a whole nother thing. But my atheist friends have told me this, and it didn't register for a while. But they're like, if there is no next life, no eternity, that means we have to do good now. We have to impact people now. I'm not going to wait for everybody to get to eternity and decide who's good and who's bad. I'm going to love people today. And that kind of didn't make sense to me, but now I get it. Like, yeah, I have to do things that are, even internally, I was like, well, we can live this shitty life and then go to the next life and it'll be good. No, I'm not supposed to hate myself. We're not supposed to hate the system. And so, yeah, that's the work of today and now.
And on that idea of, like, parts that have these maladaptive coping mechanisms, like, where you hate yourself. Because some people are like, well, how does that help you survive? I don't know if you've ever seen, like, people on TikTok being like, please, you think your little comment can hurt me? You don't know the things I say to myself. Like, and it is protective. Like, if you hate yourself, nothing anybody else is going to do is going to hurt you worse than what you do. Like, it's fine. And it really is very raw to be vulnerable enough to accept love, because then there's like, oh, well, hate is a thing. And you have to be vulnerable enough to say, yeah, that's a thing, but I'm worthy of feeling love and acceptance for who I really am.
That's beautiful. Thank you both for sharing. I know that there's so many more paths and avenues that we can go down, and I'm sure we will be exploring this topic more. Jenna, where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at my socials. Gianu System is on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube, where we have longer form videos to be more in depth on educating and answering questions. If you all have questions about D.I.D, we have a You Have Questions playlist, and it's probably on there. And then you can find our books at jekraft.com, and it's craft like the cheese. Sadly, no relation, but Kraft. And we also have on our Gianu System, we have our links to these in our bio.
Woot woot. Yes, buy their books. They are lovely.
Thank you.
Paul, do you have anything else you want to say? Do we want to react to a video, or is it?
Yeah, you want to end on a fun note? I know you're not feeling well, April, and we need. Yeah,
let's do one. So an evangelical cringe.
All right, we'll do Mark Driscoll. He's always good, and maybe we can fit a Tucker in there. But this is so we play evangelical clips and blind react to them, or some of us blind react to them. Others have seen it, and this is one of our favorites, Mark Driscoll.
15, the Lord God took the man, put him in the Garden of Eden to what? To work. You're not a man if you don't work. You're not a man if you don't work. God made men to work. God didn't make men to vote for other men to tax men who do work so they don't have to work. God made men to work. This is before sin enters the world and before the curse. It's going to require more time and energy and effort because the work is now cursed. And as men, we need to accept that. People who don't understand that we live in a cursed and fallen world, they expect work to be a lot easier. And 15 minutes into the job, they quit. They're like, oh, this is really hard. You're like, yeah, that's why we pay you. Nobody ever got paid to take a nap.
That's our
boy,
Mark.
What is he talking about? What was that tongue twister that he did in the middle? He was like, men don't pay to work to pay taxes, to vote for people, to pay you taxes to work. I wasn't tracking at all. I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, Mark. But
what I heard is if you're disabled, you're not a man. Therefore, if you are born with male parts and you're disabled, does that make you non-binary because you're not a man since you have to work to be a man?
speaking of toxic masculinity,
Mark Driscoll used to just give harsh sermons because he was an asshole, but now he's mixed. Everything is right-wing philosophy now. And so what he's saying, that the tongue twister was, a man doesn't live off the work of another man. And so he's saying, like, if you don't work and you take money to help, that's tax money given by a man who does work, you're not a man. That's what the tongue twister is. So
got it.
He's now, everything is anti-woke, anything that cares about human beings, and he is a total right-wing Christian nationalist at this point.
I will never forgive him for many things, but especially for referring to women as penis homes. That might be the lowest, but probably not actually. Now that I say that.
He's still going. He's probably gonna break that down. I do want to throw this Tucker Carlson one in. Just I want to hear what you guys think about this. So this is another
Tucker
one
who interviewed Putin.
Yeah, and this is him being interviewed after that interview.
You should challenge in the rules of an interview. You should challenge some ideas. You didn't talk about freedom of speech in Russia. You did not talk about Navalny, about assassinations, about the restrictions on opposition.
I have spent my life talking to people who run countries in various countries and have concluded the following: that every leader kills people, including my leader. Every leader kills people. Some kill more than others. Leadership requires killing people, sorry. That's why I wouldn't want to be a leader. That press restriction is universal in the United States. I know because I've lived it. Ask my former, I've had a lot of jobs. There's more censorship in Russia than there is in the United States, but there's a great deal in the United States. And so, at a certain point, it's like people can decide whether they think, what countries they think are better, what systems they think are better. I just want to know what he thinks. That was the whole point.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
He's just saying the quiet part out loud.
Yeah. And what I took from that is Jesus wasn't a leader. So he never killed anybody. Jesus isn't a leader, according to Tucker Carlson.
Yeah. Jesus is a follower.
That's right.
Okay, this will be the only time that I even kind of defend Tucker, because this even feels gross saying I'm not defending him. But who would push back on Putin in Russia? Putin literally will just take you out and shoot you if you just breathe wrong. He should have never done the interview, but obviously he wasn't going to push back on Putin in Russia, where they held Brittany Griner for the smallest amount of weed.
Well, I don't know I'm older than you guys. I don't know if you ever saw Barbara Walters sit with Yasser Arafat or Gaddafi from Libya. She got in their face, and you have to expect that your position as an American journalist is going to protect you from being thrown in prison, which is not always true, because there's a Wall Street Journal reporter in a Russian prison right now. But you cannot give a platform to a man like Putin,
no,
and not push back and let him dominate like little Tucker got dominated there. Because but part of the problem is now the right wing loves Putin. He's their guy because he's anti-gay, he's anti-woke, he's anti and he's a strong man, and we like strong men. And I think part of why Tucker didn't push back is he is an admirer of Vladimir Putin.
Mm-hmm.
CPAC this week had Orgeron from Hungary, and he got a standing ovation again, just like he did last year. This is a dictator of a country, but Christians are like, oh, he's outlawing homosexuality, he's amazing, when in fact they're horrible dictators shutting down dissent and media and all of these things. It's almost mind-boggling to think about.
I will say I didn't watch the whole interview because I don't think he should have given Putin a platform,
Mhm.
period. I mean, especially in the way that they did it. But there were a few moments, though, where if you look behind Tucker's eyes, though, he looks a little scared. Like,
He
and who would
definitely
it
should have
be?
been.
Yeah. Ugh. The
Well,
state
So-
of this world.
when Putin said the thing about, and I know you tried to get a job at the CIA, that was I know about you, little Tucker. I know your shit. And
No, I
do think,
know.
yeah.
John Cox in the comments said, I thought we were going to end on a fun note. So on a fun note, you said that Tucker got dominated by a dictator, and I was like, there's a BDSM joke in there.
Did y'all see Jon Stewart, who's back on The Daily Show
Oh.
on Monday nights, did a whole like takedown of the Tucker Putin interview, which was really funny and brilliant. But Tucker like literally goes into a Russian grocery store and
Oh
is
my
like,
God.
look at this bread. You can get this bread for, I don't know how much it was, but he tried to make it seem like everything there was so much cheaper. Like, because we have inflation in America, but look in Russia, it's like this. But he didn't say that the wages in Russia is like a fraction of what America has. So really the prices there are way higher if you actually look at their inflation and their economics. But like, of course, he was just doing a pro-Russia piece, not an actual journalistic piece. So they didn't.
And he did
include that.
you put the drachma in the shopping cart, and then you have to get the drachma back at the end. So some homeless person can't take the shopping. I mean,
I
it
know,
was so.
Someone's never been
ludicrous.
to an Aldi. Like
That was
literally-
exactly what I thought. I was like, clearly Tucker has never done any shopping.
right.
Like,
We have Aldi's here, Tucker. We have that same thing
Mhm.
here, weirdo.
And-
Aldi's has got great bread too. I'm just gonna say.
And by the way, Target carts, if you take them, they have like the little doggy leash thing on it where like if you go too far, the wheels stop turning. You can't take it off site because
I
they have
didn't know
something-
that.
yeah. At least here
Oh.
they do. Like I was pushing one and I had parked way out to another place, and all of a sudden the cart just like stops and hits me in the stomach, and,
Wow.
and
Well,
it would not go any farther.
If California ever gets a dictator, Tucker will come do a little thing at your grocery store. Like, look at these grocery carts. Aren't they
Should-
amazing?
I'm definitely convinced now that somebody needs to invent a vibrator called the dictator.
Mhm, mhm.
I would be surprised if that didn't exist.
And by the
It's
way,
got to.
thank the Lord that Jon Stewart is back. He did a piece on Palestine and Gaza and Israel this week. That was absolutely brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. We need him to run for president. But if you can go on YouTube and find the Jon Stewart clips. He's on Monday nights now, back on the show, and he's so good. It's
Shameless
amazing.
plug. This was not planned, but
Yeah. No, he's
No, I'm
amazing.
totally gonna be watching that piece on Gaza. Like,
And so what John is really good at is like, here's the bullshit here, here's the bullshit here, and he's like, hey, Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Turkey and the other countries that won't take any refugees from Gaza but won't give any money to help. He said, like, Saudi Arabia gave $100,000 of aid to Gaza last year. That's nothing for one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So he's like, none of these people are going away. We have to come up with a two-state solution. And the only way it's going to work is if countries like Saudi Arabia and UAE and Egypt get involved and do something that's not like we need to wipe Israel off the face of the earth, and figure out a way that they can be a part. And so it's just brilliant how he does it. And so I hope everybody will check it out.
that's excellent.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Thank
Jenna,
you,
thanks for
Jenna,
coming.
of the
It
Giannis
was so great
system,
being on again, y'all.
and Paul and your system. What,
And
do you have a name for your
congratulations.
system yet?
No, we really
TBD?
don't. We've been
Maybe no
playing
name?
with some different names, but they've all been around checking
Yeah.
everything out. So they definitely have enjoyed being on here, particularly with the Giannu system.
Well, I think I can speak for all of us. So we look forward to getting to know all of your parts of who
We may get with Ray and Avery. Maybe we go with Ravery. I don't know.
Ravery.
It reminds me of bravery. I like it.
Yeah.
I do like that. All right, everyone. We'll be back next Wednesday night with Tim Whitaker from the New Evangelicals.
Oh yeah.
And yeah, we'll hope you all have a great week.
And give April her birthday present. Go write a review for our podcast. Gosh darn it. Love you all. Good night.
Night.